What's up, Motion City? How's it going? Pastor Blake here. Steve asked me to bring week 6 of Esther to you, and I'm excited. I love this passage. Today, as we go through this, I think it's a really timely message for what we're talking about. And in our current situation in life, it's more important than ever to trust God, to have faith in His plan, and to believe that everything will work out. Now, under normal circumstances in life, that's tough. Like, it can be a challenge that we're faced with regularly, and we see it working out in our daily lives. The way we're living our lives now makes it an even bigger challenge than ever before. So I want to start with a really simple question, and I want you to encourage you to be completely honest when you look at this question, you look at your situation you're living in life, and you look at the circumstances surrounding you. In spite of what you see going on around you today, are you trusting God with what the future holds? So far, we've gone through Esther, and we've seen the story of Esther and Mordecai played out. We've seen how God has placed them in situations and put them where they needed to be. We've seen that even though God can put you exactly where He wants you to be, that doesn't mean things are going to be perfect. That doesn't mean that things are going to go exactly how you think they should go. Sometimes the forces of this world and the things that happen just happen. Life happens, and there's not a lot we can do about it. As we read on through Esther, we move into chapter 6, and we step into the next part of this story, and we see how God's hand is at work in our lives, even when we don't see it. And I think that is the most powerful part of this part of the story, is understanding that so often in our life, things happen, and we come to this realization that God is at work, even when we don't understand it, even when we don't see it. And more often than not, we don't see God's hand at work until after the fact. It's that old adage of hindsight's 2020. In the grand scheme of things, we get to where we're going, we look back, and we realize that what happened was planned out for us and was set forth for us. So let's move on. Esther chapter 6 says, "That night the king had trouble sleeping. So he ordered an attendant to bring the book of his history of his reign so he could be read to him. In those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigtana and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who had guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? The king asked. His attendants replied, Nothing has been done for him. Who is that in the outer court? The king inquired. As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole he had prepared. So the attendants replied to the king, Haman is out in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? Haman thought to himself, Whom would the king wish to honor more than me? So he replied, If the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with a royal emblem on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let him see that the man who the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. Excellent, the king said to Haman. Quick, take the robes and my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave out nothing you have suggested. So Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square, shouting, This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home dejected and completely humiliated. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him. So I want you to take a second and think about what we read and think about this idea that sometimes we don't realize what's going on in our lives and what God has planned for us and how God interacts with our plan until we see it at the end. And I want you to talk about this question. I want you to think about this question. Have you ever gotten to a place in life where you looked back and realized that God had completely orchestrated an incredible situation? Like I said before, one of my favorite things in life is that feeling of like realizing what an old adage means. Like the idea that we look back and we realize like what hindsight's 2020 means. And I love that feeling of coming to a place in life where you get older and maybe you look back at something your parents did and you realize like, oh, I get it now. And the lesson finally hits. And I think so often, I think why I like that is because that's how our relationship with God can be. We get this sense of this desire for direction and purpose and meaning, and we like knowing why we're doing what we're doing. Nobody likes to feel like they're just kind of going through life all willy-nilly. They don't understand what's happening. They're not being given direction, and they're just doing things for no reason whatsoever. In Mordecai's situation, I'm sure he didn't expect Haman to treat him like he did. Like, I think he knew Haman didn't like him. I think that was very abundantly clear. People back then liked to be bowed to when they were important, and Mordecai not doing that definitely would have triggered Haman in a way. However, I'm not sure he would have expected him to necessarily put him on a giant skewer. And more importantly, I think he probably wouldn't have expected just that kind of knee-jerk reaction and anger from Haman, like that built-up, pent-up aggression would have been poured out that way. And I love to see how ultimately in this situation we kind of come full circle, and Mordecai would have been able to look back and see the direction that this whole thing took. Now, granted, in the situation and in the time, I don't think he really knew what was going on. I think he just continued to honor God with his life and serve him. He believed that he was where he was for a purpose, and he tried to honor God the best he did. And I think so often we seek this grandiose purpose. We want to see in the moment the grand thing happening. And I don't think that was something that Mordecai was doing. I think the way that he was honoring God with his life wasn't to look for some grandiose plan, but to just honor him in the daily things and honor him in the things that came along. I don't think that when it happened, he clearly wasn't upset that the king didn't honor him when he uncovered this assassination plot, because he just kept doing what he was doing. And ultimately, God took that thing that was kind of set aside, that was something that happened that we would have believed was random occurrence, and he used it as this incredible divine plan, this thing that he was able to lift up. And I love how, if we break down through Esther and how we break down through our lives, if we look back so often, we see these checkpoints that feel so insignificant, these checkpoints that feel so small, and we realize God's incredible divine plan, the divine design that he uses to plan out the steps of our lives, and how in the moment things feel insignificant, and how things sometimes just feel like random occurrence. But ultimately, God's direction is at work. Ultimately, God's plan is at work. It wasn't by luck that Esther was queen. It wasn't a chance that Esther prepared a banquet and then chose to delay her request. It wasn't a coincidence that Haman happened to be in the king's court when he was. The king's request for what should be done for a man the king delights to honor. That wasn't coincidence. And like so many things throughout the Bible, they seem so insignificant when we read a story. They seem like these tiny little details that we can often just read right past. These are significant, important, valuable, necessary instruments that God is using to play out his plan. God has a plan. Sometimes we feel like we're lost in it. Sometimes we don't feel like we have any idea what's going on. Sometimes we feel like the direction is completely off. We feel like we're being led by a GPS that's just rerouting and never finds that next step in the directions. And we want so desperately to know all of it. We want to be able to click on the button and see that drop-down menu that tells us every step along the way. But we don't get that sometimes. Sometimes we don't get a destination. And we have to trust that the next step is the right one. We have to be confident that God does have a plan, that it's a good plan, that it's the right plan for us. And in the time that we're living in our situation that we're currently all a part of, it has never felt more like we don't have a plan. It has never felt more like we don't have direction. So many of us feel lost and challenged and hopeless. So many of us feel like our community and our relationships have been stripped away from us, and we're just down to the bare core of who we are. But we'll know one day the incredible plan that God has for us. We'll look back and we'll see in hindsight the direction that he had for us all along. God has a plan. His ways are higher than ours. His understanding of the future is perfect. We don't have to understand that. We don't have to know that plan. But one day we'll see it come to fruition. What we don't have to have is understanding, because we never will. We'll never have true understanding of God's purpose for every detail of our life. But what we do need to have is faith and confidence. And I know at times that's hard and it's challenging. And oftentimes we're taught to believe a certain thing and have an understanding about what that means. That faith means we can't be anxious. That faith means we can't have tension in our life, or that we can't be uncomfortable. We can't be in a place where we don't feel like we have answers. We feel so often like those can't go hand in hand. But the reality is we can have faith and confidence and still live sometimes in anxiety and tension. We can live in the challenge or discomfort of our circumstances. And that doesn't mean that they're going to melt away. It doesn't mean that they're going to disappear. It doesn't mean that they're going to be gone forever. It just means that we have to trust that we can get through them, that we can overcome them, and that we can get to the end. Because at the end of the day, life still happens. Life can be challenging and life can be difficult. But the way that Mordecai lived his life is the way sometimes that we just have to trust and have faith. We have to continue to do the things that God has placed in front of us and continue to take the steps that we're supposed to take. We have to trust that God is working and know that in hindsight, when we get to the end, we'll look back and it will be an incredible journey, and that the story will unfold before us and we'll see an awesome end. So take heart and trust that God's way are higher, that God's plan is greater, and that you will never truly know everything He has for you until you get there. That the finish line might feel like an eternity away in the situation that you're in, that the goal of just being back in community with people sometimes, or having a normal day-to-day, is challenging sometimes, but God has a great plan for it. God has incredible things for it, and God will use it in a powerful, powerful way. I want to leave you with one simple question to reflect on this week, and I want you to think about that. But first, I just want to pray and ask that God would challenge us with this idea of trusting amongst those feelings of anxiety, trusting in a sense of tension sometimes in life, and knowing that the grand plan He has for us is bigger and greater than we'll ever know. God, I just ask that you would help us in a time in our lives where we've never been more anxious, that we've never been filled with more tension, and we've never been challenged more with this idea of trusting You. I pray that we would be able to put our complete and total confidence and trust in You, knowing that sometimes anxiety exists, that sometimes discomfort exists, and that just because we pray or just because we seek You doesn't mean it all magically melts away into nothing. But it means that we can know that You have an outcome designed, special and personal to each one of us, something great and grand and incredible, that You love us so much. Amen. I want to leave you with this question, and I want you to ask yourselves this. Throughout this week, what is standing between you and a confidence in God's plan for your life? What are some ways that you can work towards being able to place more trust in His ways versus your own?